Hello, this is Arielle from Inconspicuous Bear, and I'll be narrating the heroic version of the Xavius encounter in Emerald Nightmare from a Guardian point of view. Scenarios is a three-phase encounter. The first phase starts with the boss and one very large ad you may possibly get to if your DPS is pretty slow, while the second and third phases feature the boss and a bunch of little tiny ads, or tiny and medium-sized ads. But for your purposes, the primary thing you have to worry about is managing both A, your corruption, and B, your debuff stacks. So you'll primarily operating around a taunt swap mechanic for most of this fight. I also want to mention that the tank damage is really high in this encounter, so you have to be sure that you know how you're going to handle things maybe 5 or 10 seconds into the future, because the tank damage really ramps up towards the end of a swap. So be very cognizant of that and maybe save cooldown or call for an external towards the end if you're really worried. But if you think you can handle it, that's totally fine. Just be aware that the damage ramps up over the course of a swap, and you need to be able to handle the higher amounts of damage towards the end. Before we get started with the tank-specific mechanics, I wanted to mention a couple of raid-wide ones that also affect tanks. The first of which is something called dreaming. At the start of the encounter, one of the tanks will be put into a dream state, and the reason this matters is, one, all of your cooldowns get reset once you exit the dream state, and two, the only way you can leave the dream state is by either A, dying, or B, reaching 100 corruption. This is important because a lot of the tank mechanics give you, the tank, corruption, some more than others, and you always want to make sure that the dreaming tank is the one taking the most corruption so that they don't go insane and die at the end. As I mentioned, the other mechanic is the corruption bar. It's an alternate power bar that appears at the bottom of your screen. This functions essentially identical to what the corruption bar was back on Cho'Gall, if anyone remembers that encounter. Basically, at 30, and I think 75 and 100 corruption, or 30, 70, and 100, something like that, there's new things that start happening. So at 30, you start seeing these giant pink circles on the ground. Don't stand in them. At 70, I think you start, or 66, you start seeing little pink circles on the ground. Again, don't stand in them. And then at 100, you basically just go fully insane, gaining a huge bonus for 20 seconds, and then die. The one thing to remember is if you die after you go insane, you retain your corruption. Like you retain the level of corruption you died with. So battle rousing someone while, i.e. a tank, after they've died due to being corrupted and going insane will res them as still being insane, which is really, really bad. The primary tank mechanic for this encounter is something called Darkening Soul. Note that this changes to a different debuff called Blackening Soul once the boss transitions at 65%. Basically, it's a stacking debuff that deals shadow damage to you every 1 second until it's dispelled. It has to be dispelled in order to clear it. There is no other way. It's completely permanent otherwise. You end up basically taking 3 to 4 stacks per tank swap. 4 is the safe number. However, at that point, it's obviously dealing like close to 700k damage a tick to you, which is really quite high, which is goes back to what I mentioned earlier about being able to handle the higher damage towards the end of a swap. Note that while you're in phase 1, you can swap pretty much as often as you want. Your swaps are only dictated by the amount of dispels you have available to you. So if you have a lot of dispels available, then you can swap more often, whereas if you don't, then you can't really swap that often. I will mention that whoever ends up taking the horror ad, which spawns partway into phase 1, generally can't swap because you want to keep it on top of the boss in order to kill it before either A, the second one spawns, or B, the boss transitions to 65%. That horror ad I mentioned needs to be tanked by the person who is dreaming. The reason for this is because it has a special ability which deals a large amount of corruption, and if that corruption goes to the person who is not dreaming, it increases the chance that they will go insane and die before the second phase, which is really bad because then you're down a tank and then it's probably a wipe. The last thing to remember about phase 1 is when you're having your debuff dispelled, you have to run away from the rest of the group, because in phase 1 and in phase 1 only, when the debuff is dispelled, it will do a large amount of AoE damage to everyone within 25 yards. So you want to make sure that that isn't happening, because if it overlaps with, say, like a corruption nova or something, that can be kind of problematic. So just make sure that you are running appropriate distance away. You'll have a big circle around you. You can totally judge where you need to be. Just make sure no one else is standing in your circle when you're getting dispelled in phase 1. In phases 2 and 3, getting dispelled no longer deals AoE shadow damage. Instead, it gives you a debuff, which causes you to take 150% additional physical damage, i.e. melee from melee swings, for 30 seconds. So you want to make sure you are timing your dispels around the buff that the boss gets, which is called Nightmare Infusion. This buff causes the boss to deal corruption on melee swings for 30 seconds. So you need to have whoever is currently dreaming, whoever starts dreaming at the start of phase 2, take that, or take the boss when that buff is active, so that, again, just like phase 1, the other tank doesn't go insane before they're supposed to, in air quotes. And when you're getting dispelled, you no longer have to worry about the AoE shadow damage thing. It's just a pool that forms under you, and you just stand in it and then it goes away. It's not a big deal. But you just need to make sure that you're managing your swaps around that debuff so that the wrong tank doesn't gain more corruption than they are supposed to. For talents, you have a few choices here. You can generally go with Brambles or Bristling Fur for your level 15 talent. Brambles will actually end up doing a pretty reasonable amount of damage because of the frequency of the ticks in the dot. Also, can be a lot of things in the end of the encounter which all deal damage, so you can get a lot of AoE damage out of it there. Bristling Fur obviously is going to give you a lot of mileage in terms of survival, because if you time it for the end of a swap, you'll be getting a lot of rage up till the end, and you'll be able to stay alive much better. For your affinity, Balance or Feral, both are fine. There's a lot of opportunity for cat weaving on this boss. There's also a lot of AoE in phases 2 and 3, and Balance will be able to let you contribute to that more than you otherwise would be able to, so other one's a perfectly fine choice. Galactic Guardian is going to be superior to SOTF here because there is some cleave, and anytime you start adding extra targets for Galactic Guardian, it gets a lot better. Also, Guardian of the Loon is going to be better than Earth Warden. While you do have swaps, which gives you time to recharge charges for Earth Warden, the most dangerous time is towards the end of a swap, which is when Earth Warden is not going to benefit you the least. So having the extra time on Iron Fur and Mark Reversal is going to be much better. And then you just take Rend and Tear, because there's no real benefit to using Lunar Beam, and because there are more than one target for most of the encounter, Pulverize's value is going to fall off dramatically. In terms of Guardian-specific things, I mentioned earlier that Brambles is good because it offers, because the tick rate of the dot offers lots of chances for reflection. Same goes for Ridge of the Sleeper. Generally, probably just want to save it towards the end of a swap so that you get the most bang for your buck in terms of survival and damage reflection out of it. Other than that, make sure you have you probably don't need Mark Reversal for the most of when you're tanking, but towards the end of a swap, you definitely want to be keeping it up, because when you start taking like 700k shadow damage a tick, it can add up really, really quickly. So keeping Mark Reversal up for the end is really important. And then the rest of it just boils down to corruption management. Just don't go insane before you're supposed to, and everything will be fine. I hope you enjoyed this video, and good luck in Emerald Nightmare. I'm MC'd, but the boss is dead.